Hello, this is Syed Mubashir program The Secret News Show, and today I have a very special guest from US, Hawaii. He's Micheal Salla. He is an internationally recognized scholar in international politics, an expert in UFO alien things. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for having me.
So thank you. So first of all, tell me about yourself, your background, how you get in the UFO things, and before that, what do you do?
Yes, I was a professor of international politics at American University in Washington, D.C. from 1996 to 2001. And my expertise was international conflict. And I was very interested in the sources of international conflict when I came across a video of a press conference that was held in Washington, D.C. By Dr. Stephen Greer concerning 20 plus whistleblowers who were talking about a cover up of UFOs and extraterrestrial life. And so that fascinated me because I thought, well, if this is true, it really is going to change the way international politics is understood and how international conflict, what its origins are and how we can resolve it. So that's when I began doing the research on this topic. And the more I researched it, the more convinced I became that it was very real, that there was a cover up at the very highest level of government and military in the United States concerning this whole topic of UFOs and extraterrestrial life.
Oh, I see. So, tell me about the secret space program. Where it started? Did Germans start the secret space program? Who helps the German to build the program?
Well, what we know is that during the Second World War, Germany was conducting a lot of research on flying saucer technologies. This is a fact. It's been confirmed by multiple sources. The CIA has released, and the FBI have released a lot of documents through FOIA showing that Germany was doing this research, that there were many witnesses of this. What we also know is that the US Navy was actually conducting an espionage program in Germany to find out what the Germans were doing concerning the flying saucers. In the meantime, the United States had also recovered some craft that were extraterrestrial in origin. So throughout the Second World War and the early years after the Second World War, the United States was very seriously studying this question of UFOs, how they fly, what their propulsion system is like, what the navigation system is like. This was done, not so much to find out whether these were extraterrestrial. That was already something that they realized at the very beginning, that these were craft that had been developed by some advanced society, an extraterrestrial society. But I think the US military was very concerned about how these technologies worked, how they were propelled, how they were navigated, what material was used, the metal alloys for the craft, for the metal of the craft. And so these were the sort of questions that the US military began to look for answers to, and that's when they began to cooperate with the Germans that had established bases in South America and Antarctica to get answers to those questions. So throughout the whole of 1950s, 1960s, the United States was working with Germany, the survivors of Nazi Germany, and trying to get answers to these questions of how these flying saucer technologies worked, how the extraterrestrial craft could be reverse engineered. These were questions that were being answered throughout the 50s and the 60s. And the answers to those questions was what led to the development of a secret space program in the 1970s and 80s by the United States government. And other countries basically followed soon after. Countries like Russia were not far behind what the Americans were doing.
I see. Very interested. Uh, did Germans trying to contact with the alien or the alien contact to the Germans? How did they contact each other in the first, as you said, in 30s or 20s? did they are reptilians? They are draconians? Who are they?
Well, what we know from the very beginning is that German secret societies, the Brill Society and the Thule Society, established contact with an extraterrestrial race that were human-looking. They were claimed to be from the star system of Aldebaran, and through psychic means, the Germans basically were able to communicate and got the blueprints for developing a space-time vehicle capable of reaching Aldebaran. So this was the beginning of the Germans' research into this topic. That began in the 1920s. And by the 1930s, when Hitler came to power in 1933, the Germans had already developed some prototype Vril craft that could be used to fly into space and be used as a device for interstellar travel. This was something that was already being researched. So when the Nazis came along, they appropriated all that research and basically began to develop their own flying saucer craft for the coming war effort. The Nazis were wanting to weaponize flying saucer technologies, whereas the German secret societies were wanting to develop them basically so that they could explore off-world civilizations. So, there was a very different mindset, but nevertheless, the Nazis got control of this technology, put it all under the development of the Nazi SS, and that's how their program got to take off. But a different group of extraterrestrials was working with the Nazi SS, because the Nazi SS were very aggressive, very violent, and so another group of extraterrestrials called the Draconian reptilians were the ones that began to work with the Nazis. And the human-looking group stopped working with the Germans altogether and then began to work more and more with the Allies, with the Americans, with the British and the French.
I see, I see. Okay. Tell me about the breakaway civilizations. Who are they? Are they humans? Are they aliens? And where did they come from?
Well, the breakaway civilizations are essentially these programs that were started soon after the end of the First World War to try to understand what the extraterrestrials were doing, how their craft operated. And so there was a whole program put in place to study and reverse engineer the extraterrestrial spacecraft. Agreements were reached with the Germans, and then agreements were reached also with some of these extraterrestrials. And that required a vast hidden network of very highly classified programs that were basically set apart from the legitimate classified programs that were funded by the US Congress. And so there was a parallel system set up that had an alternative funding mechanism outside of the control of the US Congress. And so that alternative funding system was created by the CIA, and that was basically designed and set up so that the CIA could gather sufficient funds from all sorts of illicit activities from around the world that would be secretly funneled through the Pentagon to fund this parallel civilization. So you had a separate funding structure, you had a separate command system, you had a separate secrecy system set up for this whole breakaway civilization. And we know that over the decades, this civilization has developed many facets. Some of these facets are very independent from one another. And so you actually have within this breakaway civilization, rogue programs within it that basically all get the funding, but then do their own thing with their own kind of agendas separate to one another. So it's become a very vast network, and this is why under the present administration of President Donald Trump, you have an attempt to create a space force. So that is the effort to try and bring together and try and kind of centralize authority over this vast breakaway civilization, with all of these rogue programs that are operating autonomously without any kind of oversight. So this is why under the present administration you have this attempt to try and centralize that under one central authority.
Ah, I see. Very interesting, very dark. Okay, sir, tell me about the who are the pre-Adamites? Are they from here? Where did they come from? Did we find their ruins, their towns, their villages? Who are they?
Well, the pre-Adamite civilization, what we know is basically this is a group that is associated with a former civilization on Mars that fled a catastrophe there and came to Earth. And that roughly happened around 50,000 years ago, that these pre-Adamites came here and established a civilization in what is now regarded to be Atlantis. And so that civilization lasted from around 50,000 BC up until around, say, 10,000 BC, which is around the time that the Atlantean civilization ended during a great catastrophic flood that is described in different religious traditions around the world. But is also connected to the description of the end of Atlantis in Plato's dialogues, which placed the destruction of Atlantis around 9600 BC. So the Atlantean civilization was essentially a pre-Adamite civilization that was a hybrid of these extraterrestrial refugees from Mars that had established a colony or multiple colonies on Earth, the most famous of which was Atlantis, and this was what was that flourished and controlled the Earth from around 50,000 BC up until around 10,000 BC. So we're talking about a 40,000 year period when the pre-Adamites were basically in control of a large area of the planet through this Atlantean civilization. They were very tall beings. The pre-Adamites themselves were like 10 foot, 11 foot, 12 foot tall. They created hybrids, and the hybrids were themselves, tall, like 8 foot tall. They had elongated skulls, and they formed the ruling elite for the planet. But the very tall pre-Adamites themselves, the original colonists from Mars, they stayed, as far as we could tell, near the ships that crash landed here on Earth, because the ships had on them the technologies that these Martians had required to be able to survive Earth's very high gravity, which is, Earth's gravity is much higher than Mars, and so that's what they needed to be. They need to be near their ships to be able to survive. But 10,000 years ago, you had the Great Flood. You had a pole shift. Atlantis, its major colony was in Antarctica, and because of a pole shift, Antarctica was moved south approximately 40 degrees to its present location, where the South Pole is right in the center of Antarctica. But previously, the South Pole was outside of Antarctica altogether. So it was a temperate climate.
I see, I see. So did the Mars have also right now the pre-Adamites, or they are vanished and totally came from here?
Well, Mars had its own flourishing civilization that was destroyed through some cataclysm and some war that they had with a super Earth that is described as Marduk or Tiamat. That the asteroid belt was originally a planet, a super Earth called Maldek. Other people give it different names, but it was a very large planet, bigger than the Earth,
Oh, I see.
and Mars was a colony or a moon of that planet. And so the Martians and the native peoples of that super Earth had a war, and that's what led to the catastrophe on Mars, and also led to the catastrophe that destroyed that super Earth. But for the Martians themselves, they survived the catastrophe, and that they were able to send quite a number of refugees to the Earth after so many thousands of years.
I see. So, what happened to the planet Maldex?
Well, Maldek was destroyed. We know this because there was a very highly respected astronomer, Dr. Thomas Van Flandern, and he came out with the the exploded planet hypothesis. This was in around 2000 when he came out with a paper, and he wanted to have this paper published in some peer-reviewed magazines, but he was refused, so he had to self-publish that paper on the internet. And so that paper basically described the evidence that there was this planet in the asteroid belt that was destroyed in some cataclysm, and that Mars was actually a moon of that super Earth. So this is something that anyone can Google. Go to Thomas Van Flandern, look for the exploded planet hypothesis, and you'll find some of the data that he was able to put together showing that there was a super Earth, and that there's some CIA documentation which is also available showing remote viewing on Mars just before the catastrophe hit it, and it basically shows how the Martians were fleeing the planet on these arcs, on these very big ships that were metallic, and they were like arcs, and they were going to a very volcanic planet on Earth, or a very volcanic planet in the solar system, which at the time was the Earth. That's the candidate for that planet that was very similar to conditions on Mars. So you have a lot of evidence that there was actually a super Earth that exploded, and that Mars was somehow connected to that super Earth as a moon in the catastrophe that happened, and that the refugees found their way to the Earth over a period of several thousand years.
I see, I see. Okay, as we talk about the solar system, right now, are we alone in our solar system? Or we have some civilization like here on Earth? Or where are they? They are humanoid, they are reptilians, draconians. Who are they? And which planet are they living?
Well, we are definitely not alone in the solar system. What I know is that there are approximately 60 to 80 different extraterrestrial civilizations that are watching the Earth and are involved with the Earth in some way, in terms of monitoring our use of resources, monitoring our politics, monitoring our development of nuclear weapons, monitoring the spread of our breakaway civilization in the solar system and beyond. So between 60 to 80 different extraterrestrial civilizations are involved in watching us. Many of them are very human-looking. Perhaps they have maybe different coloured skin and different, maybe some slight physiological differences, but they would look to us as kind of very human-looking. There are other civilizations that are clearly not human, but still humanoid in the sense of like 2 arms, 2 feet, 2 ears, a nose, and so forth. But these might look reptilian. They might look like insects. They might look like, say some seagoing aquafarians. They're a mix between, say, sea mammals and human or humanoids. So kind of like mammalian seagoing humanoids. So we have different groups, different types of extraterrestrials out there that are all very advanced technologically, that are very interested in life on Earth and very interested in how we, humanity, as the dominant species on Earth, treat the ecosystem. They're watching us in terms of how we treat the ecosystem, how we treat other subservient or lesser life forms on the Earth, like how we deal with the surface animal population, how we deal with the aquatic life on Earth. They are watching all of these different aspects, and so they basically have many different missions on Earth. Not all of the extraterrestrial species actually get involved with humans at all. Some of the species are only interested in, say, the jungles and the ecosystems of places like Brazil, or maybe they're interested in the deep ocean areas of, like, say, the Mariana Trench and what's happening down there with the sea life, or maybe they're working with cetaceans and so forth. So there's many different agendas that the extraterrestrials have, but of course all of that is kept secret from surface humanity.
I see. I see. Uh, Tell me about the when we land on the moon. What we saw is an alien spacecraft. Who are they? Are they lived on the moon, or they come from? They came from on the moon, as we did, and how we did communicate with them.
Well, the first official landing that's recognized, of course, was Neil Armstrong landing and Buzz Aldrin landing in July of 1969. And what people don't know is that when the astronauts initially landed there on the moon and then got out, there was a period of radio silence, and the television coverage stopped because basically this was a very highly controlled event. And what happened was that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin basically encountered a large number of extraterrestrial or a large number of spacecraft overlooking one of the craters there on the moon, and that they were basically very close to the Apollo 11 landing site. And the message that was given to NASA and the Apollo astronauts was that you're not welcome on the moon. Collect your rocks, finish some of your missions, but then you're not going to be allowed to come back to the moon. And so in the course of the next, I think there were another 5 Apollo missions up until Apollo 17, I think was the last one. And after Apollo 17, it all stopped. The last 3 Apollo missions, Apollo 18, 19, and 20, never went ahead, even though all of the rockets had been built. It was all paid for, but it was stopped. And the reason was because NASA and the Apollo program had been warned off the moon. They'd been told that they're not welcome there. This is something that we know happened because there was a missing 2 minutes of silence. There were a number of radio intercepts of the conversation between Neil Armstrong and Houston, the NASA Space Flight Mission Control Center, that there were ham radio operators that intercepted the communications, and they heard Neil Armstrong saying that there was a lot of spacecraft there on the moon. We know that Neil Armstrong told privately a number of people that that we were warned off the moon. There were actually people at various facilities that saw the missing, the several minutes that were missing, that saw them. William Tompkins, for example, says that he was at one of the major aerospace companies that were working for NASA, the TRW facility at Cape Canaveral, that he was actually there and he saw what the scene that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin encountered there on the moon.
I see. Did Neil Armstrong record a video of these events, or just this they tell publicly that they saw what they saw?
Yes, this was something that he just said that he said, and there was video taken of it, and there was also radio communications. The video was actually recorded, but it's never been made public. But people at Cape Canaveral, or people working for companies like TRW that were getting the feed, the live feed from Cape Canaveral, they saw it as well. They saw what Neil Armstrong was witnessing, because there were cameras there on the lunar lander. and they also heard what Neil Armstrong was describing. But none of this was actually ever revealed publicly by Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin. They were sworn to secrecy, and they maintained the secrecy even to the present day. But Neil Armstrong died just several years ago. Buzz Aldrin is still alive, but he has not revealed anything about what he saw there.
I see. So, did we saw reptilians on the moon? Who are they?
Okay, well, what Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin saw on the moon were the craft that people believe belonged to the reptilians, but they could have been craft belonging to other civilizations up there. What we know about the moon from a number of insiders and whistleblowers that have come forward is that there are many extraterrestrial civilizations on the far side of the moon that have established bases there, and that they basically maintain the moon as a kind of safe diplomatic zone for different extraterrestrial civilizations to establish bases and to do their missions on Earth and elsewhere in the solar system. So no one's extraterrestrial civilization is supposed to have total control of the moon, or to establish military facilities there and to use it in any way. What has happened is that because the Germans were the first to establish an alliance with the reptilian extraterrestrials, then the United States also established an alliance with the Germans and the reptilians and got control of the German facilities on the moon, and eventually was able to expand these on the moon. So there are many different extraterrestrial species on the moon. The reptilians are just one species on there.
I see. So, did we have a base on the moon? Did we human have a base on the moon?
Yes, there are several bases on the moon where humans actually have a presence. The old German base on the moon was handed over to the US military industrial complex and is now called Lunar Operations Command. And so that is the main hub for the secret space programs or the breakaway civilizations to establish a foothold on the moon. That's where they go, to Lunar Operations Command. There is another base on the moon. It's called, it's the Dark Fleet. It's the Dark Fleet, which is basically a base belonging to the German space program that was working with the reptilians that was established in the 40s and 50s as a result of this cooperation between the Germans and the reptilians. And so that's another base, and that is something that is used by what is called the Dark Fleet, which is this German-run secret space program that has bases on the Mars, that has bases on places like Ceres in the asteroid belt and other planets in other solar systems. And so this base on the moon is used by the Dark Fleet and the Germans for their program. But and so that's technically a human base, but it's run by the Germans. But they bring people that are working with the Dark Fleet, because the Dark Fleet basically gets recruits from the different military programs from around the world. They work closely with major corporations, especially from the European Union, and so they get a lot of resources, a lot of manpower from different countries around the planet. So that work at the Dark Fleet based there on the moon, whereas the Lunar Operations Command, that is used by the US military-industrial complex as well as the Europeans and other forces like the Brazilians and other countries that have a presence in space.
I see. I see. Very interesting. Tell me the last question. Did you think all the secrecy and the secret space program ever disclosed to the general public?
I believe it's been kept secret for since the 1940s now, and now I think what's happening is that, especially in the United States, many insiders, many whistleblowers are being encouraged to come forward and reveal what they know about this program. So it's an unprecedented era of openness in the United States. You know, the United States is the most open country in the world because whistleblowers and insiders are allowed to come forward and talk about their experiences without being killed or imprisoned. Most other countries will imprison people revealing state secrets. But in the United States, they're allowed to do this because there is such a big debate or civil war, if you like, in the United States between those in the military that want the truth to come out. They want the secrecy system to end, and they are now in the majority, which is why you have so many people coming forward. Because all of the major military factions in the United States, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Marines, the Army, and now more recently the U.S. Air Force, all want disclosure. They want the truth to come out because they see this is going to be a benefit to the U.S. military. And those that want to continue the secrecy system, those that work with the deep state, with the CIA, they are now in a minority. They're becoming less and less. And so this is why I think the secrecy system is going to end, and something like Space Force, which is being basically encouraged to come forward by the Trump administration, by the different groups within the US military. They want Space Force to come forward because through Space Force, they are now going to announce the existence of these secret technologies that were built to develop this breakaway civilization that has bases on the moon, bases on Mars, and the asteroid belt, and other places in our solar system. So it's a step-by-step process. First, you're going to have Space Force being created. Space Force is then going to basically unveil some of the anti-gravity technologies that have been built by the different groups in the US military, especially the Air Force and the Navy. Then after that, then they're going to start announcing the existence of some of these ancient civilizations on Earth with all of these advanced technologies that were used. And then eventually they're going to announce extraterrestrial life. But they're going to do it in a way where people are not going to be scared. People are going to feel that that the US and that other countries have space assets and space programs that can protect them from any hostile extraterrestrial civilization.
Okay, very well, very well. Well, thank you very much, sir, for giving time with me, and it's been very pleasure to you. It's our first interview. I hope for in future. Looking forward to you, sir.
Thank you for having me on your show, and thank you for helping spread this information to people in Pakistan and other places in that part of the world.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.